And thank you for joining us. My name is Ryan Black, and I'm joined today with Indiana Senator Mike Braun. Senator, how are you this afternoon?
Hey, very good. Been a busy day and looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again for the time today. I had a chance to talk to your colleague over in the House, Congresswoman Walorski, yesterday. And one of the things that we talked about is that we could literally talk for hours about all the things going on in Washington, mostly bad. But we're going to choose to talk about some healthcare policy today. But I do want to ask you before we dive into that, what are some things that you and your team are tracking that are particularly concerning for Hoosiers like us and folks across the country?
Well, thank goodness just recently one of the issues was relieved in the sense of the federal government competing with enterprisers back home and across the country. The enhanced unemployment benefit was by far what I was hearing anywhere I was traveling in Indiana, and I've visited probably 60 of the 92 counties already. We'll hit the other 32 over the next couple, 3 months. So thank goodness our governor followed suit, and I think there are now 24 across the country that took the federal government out of the mix of competing with private enterprise. So that for the poor states that mostly have governors of the same persuasion that are going to keep their own productive economy handicapped because they're competing with the federal government doesn't make sense. So that's what I've heard most. Back in Indiana, we had such a good economy and business climate pre-COVID, believe in balanced budgets and rainy day funds. So in talking to the governor, the only thing that got depleted in Indiana was our unemployment fund that you have to pay out of, matched with whatever federal money you get. And there's been so much largesse falling from the federal tree that that'll easily replenish it. And when you're well run like Indiana is, you then can look at doing one-time investments in infrastructure and other things. That's our comparative advantage. We're the crossroads of America, and we did make a commitment to it back 4 years ago. I was in the legislature then, but so much of what I see here is where government's getting in the way of the productive economy, and all this, which is kind of a sugar high to the economy, you need to keep in mind we're borrowing every penny of it. So that's not wise, and there's so much inefficiency, so many ways that you could save money, better allocate resources. Nobody even considers that here. You just borrow more and you keep spending more.
Well, I think speaking of government inefficiencies, let's go ahead and dive into talking about healthcare, where you've been a strong leading voice in the Senate, especially for those of us that want a personalized option for our healthcare that's going to help us build partnerships with our providers, and it's going to empower us to make our own decisions. Can you talk to us about some of the previous reforms that you have worked on and how you see a more personalized, market-driven approach as a better way in healthcare in America?
Well, I'll cite a couple examples I use all the time, and let's take LASIK surgery. There's no insurance involved. That's just providers competing for business from people that want to, do something to improve their eyesight and get the benefit of a technique. When I looked at that probably 10, 12 years ago, it was $1,500 to $2,000 an eye. And now, just through the principles of competition and no barriers to entry, full transparency, and most importantly, an engaged consumer, you can get that done for $250 to $300 an eye. And the quality is probably even better. So that is enterprise and free markets at its best. 13 years ago in my own company, which is, I'm worried that we cascade into some type of one-payer system because any of us that run businesses don't understand why we're between our employee and his or her own well-being or health, because it's evolved that way. In the healthcare industry, I describe it as an unregulated utility. They've got barriers to entry. They aren't transparent. They aren't robustly competitive. And you've got a healthcare consumer that is concerned about two things. Will the government pay for my healthcare, or will my employer pay for it? So you're not using it in a way. here's what we did 13 years ago when it was getting out of hand, and most of my employees were single males that now are married with families. Imagine what it would be like. We had 300 then, 1,200 now. Asked my son the other day when I radically changed our healthcare system to make it patient employee driven, skin in the game from dollar one, got rid of co-payments. I took their risk of going broke due to getting sick or have a bad accident. I got rid of co-insurance. You live in your deductible and you're never going to be waylaid if you do get sick or critically hurt in an accident. 13 years ago, we cut costs by over 50%. And I imagine that was going to be a short-term kind of phenomenon. But by making it consumer driven, I asked my son just 2-3 weeks ago, how much has it gone up? And I hadn't paid attention to it in 4 or 5 years, been doing other things. He said, Dad, it's gone up less than 1% a year. We have not had a premium increase for our employees in 13 years. We cut family contributions by 50%. They're avoiding the healthcare system because they stay well. And when they do get sick or get into an accident, they're consumers, not expecting whatever the cost is to make me better without having any input in the equation. I campaigned on that. People thought I was telling a fib because it couldn't be true, but it's worked year after year. So it can be done. It's just that most CEOs are too timid to change it in a way because you've got other issues of hiring people. You know, that's tough to fool around with fringe benefits. We were at a time where I calculated the risk as being worth it. Lost a couple employees out of 300, had another 10 to 15 gripe about their costs going up if they were heavy utilizers of the system. And I'll finish with this. The day after it went live, a guy that had a $200 a month medication with a $10 copay, he was only paying $120 a year. Now it was going to go to $2,400. He was not happy with my new idea. I said, have you ever shopped around for your medication? He said, well, why would I with a $10 copay? Made my point. Then I had to risk, hey, why don't we see if we can find it out there without going to Canada? It took him 30 seconds. He found it for $99. $99. That is almost exactly what we saved out of the gate by changing the dynamics. And it's 30 to 70% savings if you become a healthcare consumer. And as an employer, you give them the tools to do it.
And yeah, one of the things that you really brought up that I really want to dig into is the idea of how innovation and supply in healthcare, really affects pricing. And, I think about a bill that we're tracking moving through Congress right now, HR3, and some of the price controls around it. Can you tell us what is contained in HR3 and why we should be concerned about it?
Well, I'm not familiar with the details of that yet. Has it hit the floor over here? Or I don't know what's all in it, but if it's what I think it is, just the reason it's got House in front of it, it's not doing any of the things we talked about. It would be fixing prices, putting guarantees in there, not going after the underlying system of trying to draw that competition out on the supply side, where you pay for it just through the government side. And most of that eventually has to get into setting prices, not inducing competition. So I wish I had more information on it, but I don't even need to know it. I'm sure that's what it is.
So what are some common pushback and arguments that you get from either Republicans or Democrats or folks in Indiana when you talk about these kind of radical changes to a very regulated system that is very top down in control, and you're out here championing a decentralization where people take control of their own health? What pushback are you getting?
Sadly, it's as much the Republicans' fault as it would be the Democrats. The Republicans view the healthcare industry in a bizarre way, like it is a free market. I call it an unregulated utility mostly because they have all these rules and regs at the national and state level that restrict competition. They're not transparent. Trump went after them, with a bunch of rulings. Only one stuck, and that was for hospitals to simplify their charge masters, make it easy to understand. And the penalty is so light, many hospitals aren't even paying attention to it. I just talked to my local hospital today. They're making some effort, but I tell the CEOs that run the healthcare system, you've got a binary choice. You either fix yourselves by being fully transparent, embracing competition, get rid of the barriers to entry that you've lobbied into the system, and engage your employee to be avoiding the system due to wellness. And when you get engaged, have them shop as vigorously as they would for a big screen TV, which I know many would travel 60 miles to save $50 on $1,000. You're talking saving $300 to $400 on a $1,000 procedure minimally if you just shop around, even with a poor delivery system. The Democrats, on the other hand, think the system is too fatally broken. It's evolved too far to where it doesn't give access to everyone and doing it at an affordable price. I happen to believe healthcare, you should never go broke because you get sick or have a bad accident. That's kind of the foundation of a lot of Democratic thinking, but that's when we're completely the other way. They come up with the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. Should have been called the Unaffordable Care Act because it was big government, big health insurance, and only the insurance companies have benefited. It didn't do what they thought it should. So it's an issue that is easier to sell through government simply because the industry is digging in just tooth and claw to resist change. And if they just fixed it, when I speak to the CEOs that run the drug companies, the big hospital chains, the folks that are high up in the AMA, and especially pharma. David Ricks, the CEO of Eli Lilly, started on him a couple years ago. You're the probably most visible, even though that's 15% of the total healthcare bill. They do a great job making the pill. They just fall apart with PBMs and distributing it and pricing it. They all want the other part of the equation. If it's pharma, they blame it on hospitals and insurance and doctors. And just flip it around, not any one of the parts of it wants to take the hard decisions to embrace transparency and competition. So I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know if you can take my paradigm, and I hear a few others that work, to save a system that has the best of what we've got, but that we can take 30 to 40% of the cost out of it. And the only place that's worked anywhere else is having a heavier presence of government, which I don't like in general on anything.
Senator, you brought up something a little earlier, and something that you've long championed as well, and that's regulatory reform within the FDA. What are some measures that you think the FDA can take on to help keep our drugs safe, keep people safe that take our drugs, but also allow for innovation to take place and allow for cures to occur in a reasonable amounts of time?
All they got to do is be smart enough to see what they just did with the COVID-19 vaccine. If it had been the government, FDA and CDC, they'd still be fumbling around today, probably arguing about who's going to be in charge of it. They certainly wouldn't have tried to induce competition through pulling it out of the system or setting the environment of what did happen with warp speed. That was kind of a modern miracle for a system that wasn't used to the speed at which it normally moves. The FDA, sure, if you can take forever, you better be safe. But there are diseases like ALS and Alzheimer's that have promising clinical work being done. There needs to be a little risk taken. Certainly the people that are suffering from ALS, when it's an average 3-year lifespan after diagnosis, would be willing to try some stuff that even might have put them at risk due to, we call it the Promising Pathway Act. It's a bill I got out there that holds certain maladies at a different kind of level of scrutiny when you've got clinical trials going, to speed it up a little bit, be a little entrepreneurial, do what you just have done with the COVID-19 vaccine. So they can do it. They're just not used to having to do it. And there's been no incentives built into the system to be entrepreneurial about it.
That's a great point, Senator. And as we get close to wrapping up here, what are some things that we didn't talk about today that you think we should?
Well, for me, it would be, and we touched on it, but if you want an interesting video to watch that summarizes where we're at as a country in terms of being consumers and spenders, and it was just 3-4 decades ago when we came out of World War II, maybe a little more than that, and we were investors and savers. We were in debt, actually a little less than we are now. And we paid it all off because of our work ethic and that we didn't believe in borrowing from future generations, especially on stuff we consume. I wrestled with Bernie Sanders on the Senate floor about 10 days ago. Clip that from YouTube and get some good entertainment about what is happening in our country. Bernie, I was talking about the modern monetary theory, which is nothing more than a weak excuse to justify living in the present at the expense of the future. And we're doing it. Look at how we shut the economy down unnecessarily. We were too bureaucratic in the approach against COVID-19. We should have done things differently. We spent $4 trillion on that in the grip of it. And now we're spending another 6 to 7 trillion, 2 of which is already law. And we're going to be borrowing every penny of it. And I'm not too afraid of a tax increase because I think that's politically probably unpalatable. And that would be silly because it'll just, depress the economy. So we don't have a revenue issue. We were at the sweet spot of revenue generation pre-COVID when we lowered taxes on C Corps even though many of the multinationals do escape a little bit of that burden if you want to talking about your fair share. But in general, that, and especially when they lowered the entrepreneur's tax rate from 39.6 to 29.6 for Main Street businesses, flow-throughs, LLCs, sub-S's, proprietorships, and partnerships, that sunsets in 2025. We don't need more revenue. Bernie Sanders in our argument will say, well, if you don't want to get more revenue, even though they'll put an effort out there, it won't even cover a very small part of our structural annual deficits. They're willing to borrow the money. We're the only reserve currency currently. We're feeling no pain currently. That could turn on a dime and things could go to hell in a handbasket very quickly when we deplete the Medicare trust fund, or when people don't lend us money when we're borrowing it at 5 to 6 trillion a year. Those chickens will come home to roost, and it'll be painful when it happens.
Senator, a lot of people will say that a global minimum tax is what helps capture that revenue from companies that are outside the United States. Can you tell us what are some pitfalls with enacting kind of this first of its kind global tax?
Yeah, when you do that, that's a difficult conversation because most of the C Corps are probably just domestic in footprint. They're probably paying that full 21% or 35%, which was outrageous, before. And if you do have a multinational presence, that means you're competing in the global arena because your business is at large. So politically, it sounds kind of easy, but you're going to have other businesses in other countries that take advantage of it. So it's a slippery slope to go down. And regardless of the tax rate, historically, we generate about 17 to 17.5% of our GDP. If the rates are high, your economic growth is really slow. If your rates are lower, your economic growth is better. So you make up and create wealth and value by growing your economy. And if you ever start trying to artificially game the system with that minimum global tax, even though it sounds enticing politically, you're going to end up just hurting businesses that are domiciled here that just have a global footprint. So That's just another argument that doesn't make sense. Uh, we know what we're going to generate in terms of revenue. Keep the rates low, generate it on a high level of volume, and you get a growing economy. And then you got to focus on, it's not a revenue problem, it's a spending problem that we have here in DC. And that's when you'd have to convince the Bernie Sanders of the world, and that's not going to happen in the short run.
Thanks, Senator. I appreciate you commenting on that. And as we wrap up our conversation, let's end on a high note. So you mentioned that you visited 60 of our 92 counties over the past few weeks. What's a good story? What's something that made you laugh or brought a smile to your face from a fellow Hoosier?
Well, because I like it when you say end on a high note. I just tell it honestly, and I know that first of all, there aren't many here that come from the business world and got a little macroeconomics in their background. That's a pretty good depiction of this place here, my new employer. I go to Indiana, we got a government that's got a friendly business climate, and people are moving into the state to take part of that. And I see enterprisers across the state that amaze me. We got a salmon farm that's in Muncie, Indiana, due to our business climate, believe it or not. We've got more metallurgy and companies that make things out of metal in this state. The steel industry, has got its own issues, but there again, you get into that difficult conversation. You got to take your comparative advantage and compete with it. That means you're going to have your own thing you do best. Some of that's going to involve trading where they do it better than you. And I see that perfect combination of folks that are selling across the world, maybe even having a local farming operation that doesn't get much outside of state boundaries. But we got the business climate. We got the lowest tax rate of any state that charges an income tax. And we got rules and regulations that are neutral to friendly. We do business in my company in 40 different states. And there are some states that are worse than the federal government. And the good news is Indiana is not Illinois, New Jersey, New York, or California. We do business in all those places. And in the long run, places like Indiana and the enterprise you see, you'll have more of it because you're getting the sweet spot of what drives enterprise. And that gives me joy when I drive around and see people that have the benefit of not having a business in, say, Massachusetts, where the unemployment rate, normal unemployment rate was like $700 or $800. You add the 600 enhanced fee on that. Business were competing with government to the tune of $1,200 to $1,300 a week. That does not work. Indiana, thank goodness, is not like that.
Absolutely. Senator, thank you so much again for joining us today. Again, my name is Brian Black with Americans for Prosperity, and we've been chatting with Senator Mike Braun from Indiana. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Hey, thank you.